What's up, Canes fans? Welcome to the CanesInSight Daily Podcast, powered by Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. We are live. It's the summer, so this is the time to just talk Canes in general and really want to dive into a topic that's got the CanesInsight.com message boards on fire. It's got the group chats always going whenever it comes up, which is who is the best running back in Miami Hurricanes history. We will talk about that. We're going live, so we're going to listen to you in the chat. We'll see what you say on the message boards, and we'll give our opinion, play some highlights, and have some fun with that. So folks that require no debate, that is Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. If you or someone you care about has been injured in an accident, you could be entitled to significant compensation. 1-800-747-3733, 1-800-747-FREE. Call them up. They don't get paid until you get paid. So no one better, Anajar and Levine. All right, Pete, jump in here.
We already have a question in the chat, and it's about exactly what I said right before the show. So we are going to talk about running backs, obviously. Excited for that discussion. But question here from Manny right off the bat. Cortez Mills not visiting anymore. What is going on, D-Money? And again, this news just broke as the kid tweeted out that he will not be taking a visit to Miami, a guy that we've had on the show before, that we're fans of as a player, and also, you know, character-wise has, in my interaction with him, been great to deal with. D, the latest on this news.
Yeah, I mean, that just popped up literally right before we started recording. I'm not surprised by the news. I think he's going to Clemson. With Mills, Miami evaluates a lot of receivers in that same category, some higher than others. So I don't think Mills is somebody that they're going to be going insane to fight for at this stage of the process. Maybe that changes down the road. Clemson clearly prioritized him. They got him. I think Miami expects to have a good season passing the ball. And when they have a good season passing the ball, they believe they're going to be in the mix for whatever receiver they want. Yeah, maybe they're wrong, but this is an attitude that they've had and I think makes sense. And they're going to, as opposed to, you know, blowing their load early, for lack of a better way to say it, and spending all this money early and you know, getting a room that they don't think is going to be as good as what they do at the end of the process. They're going to be patient. They're going to have kids on visits. They're going to recruit. They're going to build relationships. And then ultimately they think they'll land a receiver class that is on par with their D-line class last year because of a just better season on the field.
All right. So again, get your questions in here in the chat. I'm going to be pulling up some stuff from the CanesInsight website as well on this debate that we're going to be having today. And D, if you want to just get right into it, this is a position, man, that's kind of been devalued over the years, at least in NFL terms, right? Because they aren't getting paid probably what they would like to get paid at that position. But man, Miami has put out some great ones over the years.
Yeah, so let's talk about the criteria here. This could be, you know, we picked the criteria because we're sitting here. So I figured we might as well have some rules so we could have a good debate here, which is, I think, injuries, throw them to the side. Don't worry about injuries. Assume everybody's in their healthy peak for purposes of this discussion. We've had some bad injuries at Miami at the running back position. So I'd rather not factor that in. Let's say who the best running backs are at their peak. And Miami production is a factor, but to me, this is just who's the best player. You know, if you had to pick a running back, you're playing Georgia tomorrow with that front seven that they had the last few years, or Alabama, right? Or some of the great FSU teams of the past. You're playing a team that you want your best. Who do you want in the backfield for that game at top health? That to me is how this debate really makes the most sense. And there's a lot of good candidates, man. We got highlights, we'll be playing. So Pete, let's just roll through some of the names. Let's start with people that aren't always featured prominently in this debate. So this is a name that I always would see when I would go to the Orange Bowl and it'd be up in the rafters, talk to people, and you even look at the record books. This guy's career rushing record stood for like 20 years, more than that, really 30 years. So right off the top, Otis Anderson, great running back for the New York Giants, obviously a great running back for the Canes. Watch his highlights. This guy's got some size. He's got the ability to make guys miss. Again, one of the first back to take what they did at UM and translate it to the pro level. I would say the first, because Chuck Foreman did as well, but really was the best pro back that Miami had produced for a while until really this golden generation of running backs in the late 90s and early 2000s. So, Pete, what are you seeing when you watch these highlights here?
Yeah, I mean, look, again, a guy who was a pioneer, so to speak, for the position at Miami. And I have the same memory as you, seeing his name at the Orange Bowl, and my dad telling me about both him and Chuck Foreman, who we will also be getting into here. But man, I mean, he was, playing for the Giants, obviously, and played for some pretty bad Cardinals teams as well. So you wonder, he's in the record books, but at the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to the teams you play with.
And as a South Florida guy who stayed home, and Pete, this is something we talked about off air, which is, when you look at older players, sometimes you say, well, this guy looks good for his era, but guys these days are so much bigger, faster, stronger. They wouldn't translate, right? That's the debate. Running back's a position that I got to be honest with you. When I look at old highlights of these players, I look at their measurables, they look better than the guys that I just saw at the combine. They look bigger. They look more athletic. They look tougher. They look faster in many respects. I mean, look at him here. Look at the speed right here. I mean, look at that move.
Returning kicks.
I mean, geez, Louis, look at this. If you saw somebody do this in college right now at 6'2", 220, you'd be talking about top 5 pick. And again, there it is right there in the highlight. I think these guys that we're talking about here, including guys like Chuck Foreman, who we'll get to, Otis Anderson right here, they would be stars in any era. And in fact, they might have been even bigger stars in this era. And I'm talking about a guy who ran for 10,000 plus yards in the pros.
Yeah. And I think it's the nature of the position these days. It's like what I said in the beginning of the show, that they aren't getting paid. Certain guys do, but it's only a handful of them because of the fact that they've been devalued. So the best athletes generally aren't playing running back. I mean, they're going to play receiver. You see how that position has been paid. Obviously, there's different types of athletes, right? And different body types, but receiver, go play corner and go play defensive back. And I think that's really what's happening, man. You go and you look at some of these testing numbers for running backs, and look, there's outliers every year, but there's a whole lot of guys in the mid 4.5s, low 4.6s at that position. And I really do think it's because of how the position's been devalued.
Yeah, I mean, look at 6'2", 225, man. This guy's size is ridiculous for a running back. Even they say bigger, faster, stronger. No, they don't make him this size in the NFL anymore. And if they do, they're not making guys miss and returning kicks like this guy was. So I got to say, watching this highlight, which I have not seen, I am impressed, man. That kick return, he was making full speed cuts. You see the toughness. You see the size. Quite frankly, he looks a lot like Edgar and James in pads when he's wearing that 32. I'm familiar with the tail end of his Giants career. I'm not as familiar with the early stuff and the dynamic ability. Look at him making guys miss here, man. This guy's got some ability. If anyone in the chat saw Otis Anderson in his prime, as opposed to watching highlights like we're doing, chime in. But man, I'm impressed. There's Matthew Owens. But yeah, look at that. Here's with the Canes. Boom. Look at that. Look at that. Look at the cuts. He's making guys look bad on these cuts. Unbelievable. What round was he drafted in? Let's see here. He was a first round pick, top 10, 8th overall. And you can see why.
Yep. I mean, stud. I mean, pulling away from guys in the open field and running through them, breaking tackles. So
here it is. Another kick return in the Orange Bowl. Look at the speed of this guy at 220 pounds, man.
Yeah, easy to see why he was a top 10 pick, especially at that.
He'd be a top 10 pick now, even with the devalued position. You don't see guys this size making these kind of moves with the top end speed. So shout out to Otis Anderson, man. I didn't realize he was that good. I got to be honest with you. I never saw that stuff. That was pretty cool. All right, another guy I want to kind of focus on here, taking it back a few years in the past, and that is going to be Chuck Foreman, who, I mentioned Otis Anderson is the first great Miami back in the pros. I was wrong. It really was Chuck Foreman, who made some great plays for those iconic Minnesota Vikings teams of the 70s. Known for his spin move. I always watch NFL films and they talk about this guy's spin move as being iconic. Somebody who, watching his pro highlights here at Miami, similar to Anderson, was returning kicks, was a great receiver as well. A big guy. Again, look at the moves this guy, look at the spin move. these are not small guys. Nowadays, you see scat backs making plays in the pros and doing these kind of things. But these guys here are all true franchise backs with their size, and they're still making big plays, in terms of running the ball and being explosive.
What a Vikings team too as well, right? With Fran Tarkenton at quarterback. This is the Purple People Eaters as well, right, D?
Oh yeah, that's
if I can flex my old school knowledge a little bit.
Yeah, my favorite Rick Ross line: beating them by bigger margins than Fran Tarkenton. Look at for the statistical profile here for Chuck Foreman. Had 3 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons in the mid 70s. He was the Rookie of the Year. Made multiple Pro Bowls. Made Pro Bowls 5 years in a row. Really, the first 5 years of his career, and then at 28 fell off a little bit, which. We've seen that story with running backs and injuries, especially back in the day. Another guy who was highly valued by the draft. There's a time when running backs were highly valued. First round pick, 12th overall in 1973, originally from Maryland. So this is a player who, it's funny, going back and looking at Otis Anderson and Chuck Foreman, they really are similar to the guys like McGahee and Edgerrin that were just obvious studs with the size and the speed. Look at these moves. Chuck Foreman, you look at the measurables here, 6'2", 210 pounds, doing all of these things. So
and they looked like they used him out of the backfield as a receiver a lot as well, which again, I'm not an expert at football from this era, D, but from my understanding, I don't think running backs were really being used in the passing game like that.
Yeah, no, it's the receiving yards, talking about when he was in his prime making Pro Bowls. 37 catches, 53 catches, 73 catches, led the league in receptions in 1975, was 4th in MVP that year as well.
There you go.
On top of running for 1,000 yards. So really just a very interesting player when you watch these highlights and you watch what he's able to do with the size. But we got some folks that had seen all these guys.
I think John Futch said that I think this is when we were talking before about Otis Anderson. And he said he was actually like 240 pounds.
Unbelievable. Look at it. We got Robert Halub here. He's seen them all. So he's his pick? Seen it from Chuck Foreman to today. I feel the best, even though he was injured too much, was Frank Gore. We will get to Frank Gore. Some other names I want to highlight before we get into sort of what I call the golden generation, not to use one of your soccer terms, right, Pete? You like how I did that? Of Miami Hurricanes running backs, which was probably that late 90s to early 2000s era. This is a player who we talked about players from the distant past. This is the most recent player to me that I want to highlight, which is Duke Johnson. Now, Duke Johnson, very different than most of the names on this list, including the older names, just because of the size, right? He did not have the size of the names that we're talking about, which I think, even though he was the most productive, he has the the career rushing mark for the Canes, despite only playing 3 seasons. I think, size-wise, if you're playing against an elite front seven, you might not want to try out Duke Johnson, but career rushing yards, 3,519, above Otis Anderson, above Edgar and James, above James Jackson, Clint Portis. He's number 1. And he did it very quickly. He's also second on the single season list to Willis McGahee. We all remember Willis McGahee in 2002, but Duke in 2014, 1,652 yards at an extremely high yards per carry. And you see it in the highlights. This guy was a big play machine.
Yeah, and I mean, you see in the highlights here, some of the younger fans, I guess you could say. We got our boy Marrero here saying Duke is the greatest. Devin Air, who said he's 24, said 8 Ball made me a true Canes fan. Matthew Owen said loved him. I mean, he was electric, that's for sure. I think the thing holding him back here, not so much the size as much as, and you see him here with the touchdown against the Gators, but like he didn't play on very good teams, right? So just in general, like he didn't play in a lot of big, meaningful games. Didn't have, again, not his fault, but just the nature of the era that he was a part of. And then I think what probably does give him a little bit of an edge in this debate, though, is the fact that he was the stature of recruit that he was during the time that Miami was going through their stuff with the NCAA, obviously, and Golden had just come in, but he was the original like ambassador recruit in today's, like, I think, social media era of recruiting. D, I mean, I don't know if you agree with that or not, but he was such a, I guess, cult hero in a sense down here that, like, that him coming here when Miami was at their lowest, you could say, was such a big thing for the fan base at the time.
Yeah, and Pete, why don't you pull up his high school highlight reel too? Because I listened to the Move the Sticks podcast, which is my favorite podcast. It's former NFL scouts just talking about NFL football from that high level of, football lifers, guys that scouted the position in the NFL and really understand that game in that way. And they were talking about the best high school highlight reels. And this was like a year ago. And they talked about Duke Johnson's highlight reel being the best they'd seen in high school. And again, these guys are NFL scouts. They've seen it all. They're not Miami fans necessarily. So to hear them talking about Duke Johnson's highlight reel all these years later with that kind of perspective really, to me, said a lot. I think Duke's the kind of guy that when you played against smaller players, he was the best because his size wasn't a hindrance. All his other skills played up. The bigger the opponents got, he was less dominant. Obviously, you saw it in the pros where he was a good player, but not a dominant player like some of the guys on this list. But in the high school level, when the size is not a hindrance, his footwork, his ability to jump cut in traffic, to be totally on balance at all times, his instincts, not a 4.4 speed guy, but played fast. Again, you see his ability to make those quick cuts without losing any speed. Look at that full speed cut across and then back against the grain. And then boom, made that last guy fall in his face. I mean, he is so dynamic in short spaces, and I think underrated with Duke. Look, again, short spaces. You see the balance
against Northwest. I mean, again, these are against Northwestern, Glade Central. These are against here's Glade Central. So.
Yeah, and his hands. I think an underrated thing about Duke. He had, for being a small guy, he had mitts, and you see him. Sometimes he carries the ball like a loaf of bread, but he's able to make moves with it. And his stiff arm was probably Willis McGahee, I would say, had the best stiff arm I saw because he was so big. But the best stiff arm pound for pound was 100% Duke Johnson.
Yeah, and the dead leg move also was a signature of his. Got a couple more comments in here. Marrero says Duke committed sophomore year and was a 5-star. And then he said he actually played on the best teams we've had in my lifetime. You must be forgetting the Orange Bowl team, man. I don't think Duke was on that squad. That was the Homer DJ Dallas year, right, D?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was man, what a terrible run this has been for Eric
No
Marrero.
Smoke is not too he's not too amused by our discussion today. D says listen. Must be a slow news day. Didn't Summer 2 start as Barron and Martinez confirmed? Those guys have been confirmed for a while. And again, we said at the start of the show, it is a slow news day and it is the summertime, but guess what? We're going to keep it going nonstop. Since we've been starting this daily thing, we have not missed a day, and that's for all the fans out there. So appreciate everyone's support. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Yeah.
Like and subscribe. Thank you. We should have been saying that more. Like and subscribe if you have not. Appreciate everybody. John Futch, go pull up John Futch. John Futch, man, appreciate you joining us here. We got a vet who's schooling us on some of the older Kane, the pre-Schnellenberg Kane knowledge. He said Chuck Foreman also played wide receiver at UM. Imagine 6'2", 210 with that kind of moves with the ball in his hands, also played receiver, again, led the NFL in receptions. So these guys really could go, and they could go in a way that would still translate today. So,
Matthew Owen said that first BC game of Duke, he had LeBron tweeting about him.
Yeah, I was there. That was unbelievable. You'd heard the hype all summer. I'd seen him in camp, and then seeing just those big plays right away, made his presence known and never stopped making big plays. So yeah, Duke Johnson for a generation of fans was the guy. I think in production you can't deny, but I think from a size and speed standpoint, I mean, we just saw Chuck Foreman and Otis Anderson in their UM clips, and the size speed combo there was pretty remarkable when you compare it to a Duke Johnson. So I think
Anthony Burke had a good comment here, though. I think Duke should have played corner. I think at the end of the day, obviously it worked out for Duke. He played in the league. He made it to a second contract. But we want to talk about real upside. I think, man, at corner he would have been. And you talk about those hands. I think he was a lot more physical than people realized. I remember him coming out. Some people suggested him playing corner might have been the move, D.
Yeah, I that's what I said. 'Cause I'd seen him hit. You know, he would have been NFL. I think he said himself that he thought from a professional standpoint that would have been the move for him. But you know, he wasn't the tallest. He would not have been the tallest corner either. He would have been like an Asante Samuel type corner, anyways. He was very physical. He wasn't like a 4.4 speed, so he'd probably be a nickel kind of corner. So maybe his best bet was running back. He played for a long time in the NFL, and of course, he is on top by himself on Miami's career rushing yards list. Another guy who's a totally different player that I wanted to highlight here, who's actually the highest drafted Cane at running back, the number 3 overall pick, was Alonzo Highsmith. Really more of a all-purpose back, I guess you'd say, a fullback, tailback, you know, not necessarily your traditional running back, but a guy that had enough speed to be the 3rd overall pick in the draft, a guy that had enough toughness to be a boxer, a successful boxer, and really a very interesting football player who, to me, in this modern age, probably could have been like what you see with Mark Fletcher and a guy like that you really don't have to take off the field because the pass protection, you can catch, and of course you can run with the ball.
Yeah, and obviously a great Cane, and had been working here the last few years and is now with the Patriots. But yeah, man, you see it. You see him lowering his shoulder. He was an absolute load to bring down, and a tone setter. We talk about that a lot at the position, right? And that's what I think Miami has now in Damian Martinez to go along with Fletcher. But someone who, as the game wears on, can really batter a defense down and wear them out.
And they look at 1984 with Bernie Kosar. What a backfield that was. 906 rushing yards, 6.2 yards a carry. That was not common back in those days because they ran the ball so much. The boxes were so stacked. That is a very healthy yard per carry average. 9 touchdowns, also at 257 receiving yards. From scrimmage that year in 1984, 1,163 yards, 6.4 yards, a touch, and 11 touchdowns. So Alonzo Highsmith really is someone who I think deserves to be in this conversation as far as the highest drafted Cane, a very versatile Cane, 6'1", 234. There are some big boys on this list, man. And you don't see these body types unless you're talking about Adrian Peterson or Derrick Henry, the occasional guy like that. You're not seeing these body types in the NFL draft anymore.
Yeah, you really aren't. I mean, it's just, again, the nature of how the position has changed, I think, and look at it, Selwyn Brown getting interviewed there, and that's of course the father of Damari Brown and Devontae, who's at FSU now. But yeah, man, real heritage here when you talk about Alonzo Highsmith. Yeah,
Pete, why don't we pull up here the highlights of our last player, which is as far as of this category, which I think is kind of the folks that are on the outside of this discussion typically, which is Melvin Bratton. Melvin Bratton, talk about injury not being a factor here. Melvin Bratton obviously tore his ACL, right before he was set to be drafted, ended up dropping to that 6th, 7th round range. Actually got drafted twice, both in that range, which is unfortunate. Never was able to really show what he could be in the pro level, but somebody with size, with speed, with receiving ability, like a lot of guys on this list, man, they're prototypical. We're not talking, aside from Duke, man, these guys are all 210 plus. They can all catch. They can all make big plays. These are not one-dimensional players. Melvin Bratton, 6'1", 225 pounds. You look at him at the college level, he was a very good receiver, 391 yards as a freshman and as a senior, 364 yards receiving. So he was a multi-purpose beast, 5.7 yards per carry as a freshman with that backfield with Alonzo Highsmith. Career numbers aren't going to wow you, but he was part of some of the best teams in Miami history. And again, a runner, a receiver, very much a leader on those teams, and somebody who fits that classic Cane mold. And when you see, guys nowadays, we're looking at recruiting videos, right? We're trying to find a Cane tailback. And when people say, what's a Cane tailback? Look at the guys that we're talking about on this list. 6'1", 215 to 230 pounds, can run, can return kicks, can catch, can make big plays, are tough, are smart, can block. That's the level. If you ask why Canes fans have high standards when it comes to the running back position, look at the guys on this list that aren't even in the top 4 of the conversation that we've gone through. These are complete backs with elite physical tools, and that is what Miami's trying to get to. shout out to Melvin Bratton. Really never got to see what he could be with his injury.
If he was today's era, that the ACL obviously is not much of an issue. But back then, it's almost a career ender.
Yeah, unfortunately, a theme we're seeing with all these guys, injuries. So let's get to the big boys here, right, Pete? And people, by the way, while you're at it, before we even get to these big boys, pull up Canes Insight forums, get some of those posts on here, because CanesInsight.com. If you're not signed up, again, like and subscribe to this podcast. Appreciate you. Also, should be signed up for the CanesInsight.com free forums. We got news on there, original content. We also have the most active Canes community in the planet. 6.9 million posts and counting, all free. It is, you'll laugh. You'll get news right when it happens. Again, somebody sneezes on Instagram, it is on the board immediately. Any kind of breaking news is there first. Long discussions. We put up a post about this, who was the best running back in Canes history, and that discussion was popping, really inspired this idea to bring this to the YouTube, because just making putting that question out there on the boards had people rolling. 5,000 views, 147 replies, and it's still rolling. And that, I just put that out there pretty recently. So, a lot of opinions here. And Frank Gore was a popular name, but he was not the only name. There were a lot of names discussed. Stephen McGuire, who even mentioned on this show, another big back, he got some love. So, talk about Freddie Miles. Some folks played against Freddie Miles, who was never a Cane, but a great Dade County back that people still tell legends about. Somebody who, for different reasons, wasn't able to meet his potential. You see folks on the board who played against him. So again, CanesInsight.com forums, man. Sign up if you haven't done so. It's free. You'll get addicted, I promise you. All right, let's get to the big boys here, Pete. So first up, let's go with the person who I think gets the most mentions when you bring this topic up, which is Frank Gore. Pete, you're younger than me. What are your memories of Frank Gore?
As a freshman, running for about 30 yards every time he touched the football, and him being the third or fourth back on that team, right? And just wanting him to get the ball more. But the best part about those blowout games in 01 was that he would get the ball late in the game. And I just remember him. I mean, it was just like ripping off 10, 15-yard runs with ease. I don't know what his yards per carry was that season, but it had to be over 6-7 yards. 8. There you go.
Yeah,
and that's without me even knowing. That's just me just like it was a complete guess, but that's what it felt like.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I know. He would, you said it, he would just come in and it's like, you knew he was different. And that was at a time when Miami had just seen the best backs any school's ever seen, with Edgar and James, followed by Clinton Portis, followed by Willis McGahee. And then you had Frank Gore. You know what? Let me correct myself. And someone in the chat's probably listening or on YouTube saying, Danny, you got that wrong. It was not 8 yards a carry. 9.1 yards a carry as a freshman, 562 yards.
There you go.
Now, if I'm going to present and of course, in the NFL, he's the third leading rusher of all time. So you have the what you saw as a freshman before his injuries. You saw what he did as a pro after his injuries. And Pete, go pull up.
Yeah, I'm pulling up his Miami stuff right now.
You know what? Don't even pull up his Miami stuff. Pull up his high school stuff.
Yeah.
Pull up. Canes Insight did a video with Frank Gore, and these weren't even his best highlights. These are just the ones we could find from Coral Gables High. 3,000 plus yard rusher, probably the most dominant runner in the history of Dade County, more than Dalvin Cook, more than all these great names that we've talked about here. Guys like Bratton, guys like Highsmith. Nobody was running in Dade County or South Florida in general like Frank Gore. Look at this video. We did this like 10 years ago, man. This is old school. But watch him here. You just see no wasted movement. He's got the cuts.
The jump cuts, yeah.
Yeah, and this is not like his best runs. It's just like game by game. So his individual games were like highlight reels. When you run for 3,000 yards, you're making runs like this in every single game. You see the speed. That speed was more than what we saw at San Francisco. He had an extra gear. He was never going to be a track star, never going to be as fast as some of the guys we talked about on this list, but he did have a little more speed. But again,
contact balance out of control.
You see him coming back for more. He's just you could tell he wanted it. He didn't go out of bounds. This, I believe, was
a game against Columbus. That was him and D Shep, right?
Yeah, Daryl Shepard.
Yeah.
So a lot of people thought Miami should have recruited. He was a rapper. I think he signed to he signed with like Master P. He signed to one of these labels that was a little past his glory days, but he was still a name. I don't know if it was No Limit or Death Row. He signed to one of those like later on after they were a little past their prime. But anyways, that's enough D-Shep.
That was a televised game. I think it was like Sun Sports or something. I remember hearing about, again, a little bit before my my time there when I was really into it like that. But I was like 8, 9 years old. But yeah, you see these clips. I mean, he breaks through arm tackles with ease. And
you know, never was a track star, but here you go. I mean, that's some nice speed right there. I mean, he's able to, although look, he almost got hawked. I'm sure that guy runs a 4.3 as Northwestern. But to me, what jumps out is he is at top speed so quickly and he's hitting that hole so aggressively. I mean, there's no hesitation in his game. Obviously he has vision, so he's not, you know, hitting something that's not there, but he trusts his instincts so much. Look at that open field cut right there. Again, I don't know if you had this kind of dynamic ability ever, aside from his freshman year at UM, that you see here in some of those highlights when it comes to cutting against the grain and a little bit of the speed. But you always saw in San Francisco that ability to see the hole, to get small, to avoid those major hits, and then to be decisive when it came time to run. So Frank Gore, again, if you had a poll, he's the guy that typically is selected as the best back. Now, if I will say a counter, right, because this is a debate, he was not the fastest guy on the list. He was not the best physical, even before the injuries. He was not the best physical specimen on this list. He was not the best receiver on this list. We looked at Foreman and some of these other guys. We're going to get to Edgar and James. He was not the best receiver on this list. So not the best breakaway back, not the best receiver, and not the most physical specimen, but
probably the best vision and patience.
Yeah, I think in terms of pure running back attributes, you would have to say Frank Gore. Look at Anthony Burke. Anthony Burke's had some great stuff in this chat. Pull him up here. Saying, remembers when Larry Coker said that Frank Gore was the best back he's ever been around, that he was a coach at Oklahoma State with Barry Sanders. Also had Thurman Thomas. Imagine Larry Coker, man. He had Barry Sanders and Thurman Thomas in the same backfield. And then he goes to Miami, and he's got guys like, you know, Clinton Portis, Willis McGahee, Frank Gore. Pretty good run for Larry Coker. I'm sure he made all those guys, right?
Yeah.
But Don Solinger deserves some credit here too. And we're going to talk about a lot of Don Solinger players that he recruited, but also coached. Because one thing about Frank Gore and a lot of guys that I'm going to get to on this list, complete backs who could pass protect. Frank Gore was an awesome pass protector, and that continued to the pros. That's why one of the many reasons why Jim Harbaugh and coaches like that loved him was because his ability to not only be willing to pass block and to have the right technique pass blocking and attack the blitzer, his ability to see it and know where it was coming from was really outstanding. Just a football savant when it came to his football IQ and his ability to see the game. Let's go to a totally different, you know, physical type profile here, but similarly dominant player on this list. Who is next, actually, Pete? I pull up the rundown. Who do we got next?
We got
Edgar and James. All right, so this guy right here, I'm just going to start with the combine because I did not realize. I knew a lot about Edgar and James. I had forgotten his combine dominance. Because it was just not, it wasn't like how it was now where it's on TV and stuff. You had heard he did good and he was going to get drafted high. Edgar and James at the combine weighed 216 pounds, ran 4.38 at the combine. So this guy, we think about a lot with Edgar and James, but the pure breakaway speed, you know, it's funny when he was a freshman, he got run down a little bit. He didn't always have that breakaway speed. Certainly by the time what you're seeing here, this incredible performance against UCLA, but 4.38 at the combine, man. I think we think of McGahee as kind of the physical freak of the group, but man, Edgar and James from just a pure physical standpoint, I think he stacks up with these guys.
Yeah, we're getting some Najee Davenport comments. So I mean, before the knee injury, he was up there as well, D. But no, you said it. At his size, 216, right? And when he's running, it looks like he's gliding, right? It almost looked like he was always going to fall over. But man, what a career for him. And I mean, really, I think helped take Peyton to the next level there.
And he's got really brought back running back you know, because he was the first one. Again, Otis Anderson and Chuck Foreman in the past.
That 5 looks so nice on him too.
Yeah, aesthetically, you were saying that he's the best. You know, here's what I'll say. If you could find some Edgar James rookie highlights or early in his career highlights from the NFL, pull those up. Because here's one thing I'll say about Edgar James. And he's, I've been thinking about this. I can understand Frank Gore. But Frank Gore, we never really saw an extended prime from Frank Gore. We saw the high school freshman year Frank Gore. We saw after injury at Miami when he was a little heavy, which was not really as good as anybody on this list at Miami after the injury. Then, of course, in the NFL, he's a third leading rusher of all time. No one on this that we're talking about here, even a Hall of Famer like Edge, produced like Frank Gore in the NFL, but he was a different back. He didn't have the dynamic ability of his younger days. So we're kind of combining things for Frank Gore. We're taking the dynamic ability when he was younger and the longevity of when he was in the NFL. In terms of like a 4-year run, I don't think there's been better than Edgar James as you watch him here. Look at that. I mean, this is NFL. So we talk about with injuries, right? Everybody with the injuries, the first thing you think of is Frank Gore because he had the 2 ACLs. You think of Willis McGahee, the high-profile injury at the Fiesta Bowl. Here's what people don't remember about Edgar James. His first 2 years in the NFL, he won the rushing title both years. He was leading the league in rushing his third year when he tore his ACL. And this is 2001. This was before, ACLs were as easily rehabilitated as they are now. So he was on pace to win 3 straight rushing titles to begin his career. I mean, that's like Jim Brown stuff. He also was an unbelievable receiver. His first 2 seasons, 586 yards receiving, 62 catches, 63 catches, 594 yards receiving. He never got to that point again as a receiver. So if you really look at his last year in Miami when he was completely dominant, what he did at the combine from a physical standpoint, he was a great blocker like Frank Gore, and he was a better receiver. He had the breakaway speed at that time. We always talk about not seeing Frank Gore's true potential because of the injuries. We need to start talking about not seeing Edgar James's full potential because of the injuries, because if he would have stayed healthy, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 straight 1,000-yard seasons after his injury. Once he got back, it took him 2 seasons to really get back. Obviously made the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But the guy that was in the league as a freshman or rookie and second-year player and a third-year player before getting hurt, he was like an Adrian Peterson taking the league by storm. And Pete, I don't know if this is when you were a kid. I mean, you remember watching this?
I remember it. I remember being confused when they replaced him with Joseph Adai. I think that was what happened when they took him. Maybe it was after that, but you see one or 2 cuts and he's gone, right? And nice stiff arm as well. But versatility, and like I said, I think he was obviously Peyton Manning was great in his own right, but obviously needed someone there with him to take the load off him a bit. So
yeah, Edgar James, from Immokalee High, known for just being a hard worker. Look at the balance and the cut. I mean, that is unreal. His footwork at his size. He was also probably the most patient guy in this list. Frank Gore had incredible vision, but his running style was a little more decisive, I think, than Edgar James. Edgar James was really, really patient. Towards the end of his career, when he lost some of the twitch, maybe it hurt him a little bit. But when he had the ability to just stop and start and accelerate like that, I was at this game. I mean, look at this move against the Dolphins. But he had a very unique running style. He was definitely, he was big, he wasn't the type to just hit the whole full speed and run you over. He was going to be patient and then look at these open field moves. Again, this Edgar James that we're looking at here is not even the Edgar James that made the Hall of Fame for all those consecutive 1,000-yard seasons with the Colts. This is something different. I think this guy's more comparable to like the O.J. Simpsons, the Jim Browns, guys that had the speed, the size, the cutting ability, and the production to completely dominate.
Yeah, there he is. I mean, breaking tackles from Zach Thomas and running away from Dolphins defenders. So.
Oh, Me Jr. has a great point here. Pull up Me Jr. here. Me Jr. says that Edgar was traded for Marshall Faulk, who could have been a Cane too. Great story and true that Miami wanted Marshall Faulk to play cornerback. Obviously, that was the wrong decision. We were on the right side of that decision with Clint Portis, who we'll talk about in a second, because the Gators wanted Clint Portis to play safety. We took him as a running back. The rest is history. We were on the wrong side of that mistake with Marshall Faulk, trying to turn him to a corner, kind of like our Duke Johnson discussion earlier, Pete. And obviously, we should have listened to the player there. That's why I'm a big advocate of, if a guy is a special talent, let him play the position he wants. And if he gets beaten out, he'll move. Maybe in the transfer portal era, it's a little trickier, but just get the talents here. Give him a chance. You could be wrong. Jim Kelly, we got him because Penn State wanted him at linebacker. Marshall cautionary.
There was a lot of people who wanted Derrick Henry to play a different position. And Alabama obviously took him, and that worked out pretty well for them. So
no question. Devon Mayfield makes a great point here, which is that, Frank Gore never led the league you make two great points here. Pull both his comments up. This guy says he's the best running back in history, came to the L, led the league in first 2 seasons in rushing. It was on his way to third before getting hurt, like I mentioned earlier. And then go to the second point here. Frank Gore never led the league in rushing. It's true. Frank Gore in the NFL, third leading rusher of all time behind Emmett or Walter Payton and Emmett. So obviously and ahead of Barry. So obviously we remember that aspect of Frank Gore, but Frank Gore was never dominant in the NFL. He had a couple seasons in San Fran when he was pretty close, but he was never dominant like Edgar and James was his first 3 seasons, where he really was. If I had to compare Edgar and James in those 3 years to someone in the modern era, it would have to be like a, Derrick Henry or an Adrian Peterson. And what separated Edgar and James from even those two guys, who to me are the highest standard of the modern era when it comes to just physical running presence. Derrick Henry doesn't catch the ball like that. Adrian Peterson never caught the ball like that. Edgar James was a great receiver, one of the smartest players that Peyton Manning says he ever played with. I mean, there's really no flaw to his game when he was full speed running that 4.38, as was verified in the combine. So for me, it's maybe a controversial pick, I guess. But if you ask me if all these guys we're talking about and I had to go to war tomorrow and I get them all in their peak, give me that version of Edgar and James.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think McGahee also has a bit of an argument there, but we'll get into that soon.
All right, so who's next up?
We have Portis up next.
All right, pull him up here. So Clint Portis is interesting. I go back sometimes and I watch the 2001 Canes just to kind of see what it's supposed to look like, right? And maybe things you forget when you're watching it at the time. Now college football's changed so much. One thing I forgot watching the 2001 Canes, this could sound stupid to say, but whatever. I forgot how good Portis was. And I mean, we know he's good, right? But I forgot how good he looked among other great players. Like, he was probably the most valuable player on that 2001 team on offense. Ed Reed, let's say, on defense. But really, if you go back, we think about that 2001 backfield with Willis McGahee and Frank Gore, but it's not like those guys contributed to wins on that particular team. That was the Clint Portis show that year. And if you go back and watch those games, obviously the one that jumps out, Boston College, Clint Portis kind of carried us to that win in a game that would have been probably the worst loss in Miami history when you go back and look at it. He carried us to that win on his back. Everybody remembers, Mike Rump making a play on the ball, Matt Walters getting the interception, Ed Reed stealing it from him and scoring the touchdowns. Watch that game and tell me who the best player on the field was. No question about it. It was Clinton Portis. He could win in the snow in those kind of really tough games, but then you put him in a high-paced offense like the Broncos, and he was the most dynamic running back in the NFL, bar none, when he's on the Broncos. Look at these long runs when you watch these highlights. I mean, he was a sprinter in high school, 100-meter sprinter. I think he claimed a 10.600. You obviously saw that when he was playing. He got run down there, but he definitely had some long runs.
I mean, we have a comment here from Anthony Burke saying he should have never left Denver. He was traded after his first season for Champ Bailey, who was at the time the best corner in the league, right? I mean, he was completely locked down, or was it the other way?
Second season. No, he was traded second season. Yep.
Yeah. Second season.
For a lockdown corner, which, what a trade. I mean, can you imagine that trade nowadays?
That was before trades. That was like, I remember that being like the first trade I remember. Obviously there was the Ricky Williams draft trade there, but that was like the first player for player trade. I remember that's when trades weren't really prevalent in the league like that back then. But
yeah, and still aren't. I mean, imagine like if someone just said, hey, we're going to trade. I mean, who's the best running back? Christian McCaffrey for Patrick Surtain. I mean, that'd be like crazy. So that was interesting trade. But if you look at Portis, his first 2 years at Denver, 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns his first year, 1,591 yards his second year, 14 touchdowns, long of 59, long of 65, led the league in yards per carry of 5.5. This guy was a dynamic player for the Broncos. Look at the yards per scrimmage his first 2 years, 1,872 yards per scrimmage his first year, 1,900 yards per scrimmage his second year, 17 touchdowns, 14 touchdowns.
He was a beast in fantasy. I remember my early days of playing fantasy. He was a monster. And look, I remember he threw a couple touchdowns too. There's a highlight there of one of them, but I remember him having a couple halfback passes as well. So,
and he was still a great player at Washington. I mean, you talk about 1,300-yard season, 1,500-yard season, 1,200-yard season, 1,400-yard season, was on his way to another one. He got hurt when he was 25 in 2006. So he was really one of the best backs in the league at Washington as well. I think where you saw the drop-off was the yards per carry, because it's off. The whole offense was him. There was nothing on those Washington Redskins teams besides Clint Portis. So whereas with the Broncos and a scheme that was running back friendly, 5.5 yards per carry, 5.5 yards a carry. Then immediately you see a drop, 3.8, 4.3, 4.1, 3.9, 4.3. Kind of became a workhorse back, was retired. It's amazing how young he was. He retired at 29 years old, was really beat down by those Washington years. You wonder if he stayed in Denver, where he would have had a more, probably a lesser load, would have been making more big plays, but less of that grinded out. What could his pro career have been? And this is a guy who ran for almost 10,000 yards almost 10,000 yards in the pros.
Yeah.
75 TDs.
Definitely. And again, 29 is early, but at that position, man, they take a definite beat.
Do me a favor, Pete. Pull up Clint Portis' high school highlights here, because we posted them on CanesInSight back in the day. And I really wanted to. This was probably my favorite video we did. I think I used Gasoline Dreams from Outkast for this one. I want to say, if you guys are bored, go back and look at some. They're not even on this YouTube channel. These are on some of the YouTube channel that we abandoned, but you can still just Google high school highlights from some of these guys. You'll see them. We made a bunch. I put some old school rap songs on a lot of these videos. Clint Portis, I remember, was Gasoline Dreams by Outkast. I remember I started it right here. Watch, boom, there he is, a safety. He was an unbelievable defensive back. When you watch these high school highlights up in Gainesville, you can understand why Spurrier wanted him as a safety, because he probably would have been a Pro Bowl safety as well with his physicality and his speed. But running back wise, I mean, everything you saw at UM and you saw with the Broncos, you see here, the ability, he's dragging guys. He was always very, very tough. Again, that safety background paid off for him. Also a great pass blocker, just like all these other guys. But the speed.
Look, yeah, me Junior literally just said an underrated pass blocker.
Yeah, all these guys. That's one thing about these Miami backs. Frank Gore, Edgar and James, Willis McGahee. I remember Willis McGahee. We'll talk about him in a second. Breaking Cameron Wake's leg in Penn State. We'll talk about that. But Portis was really, really nasty pass blocker. The same way he pops guys here in terms of playing safety, that was the same way he'd attack guys when they'd come in the hole. He'd pop them right in the nose. He was very, very aggressive as a pass blocker, on top of being very aware. He probably had the most of all those guys as a pass blocker. He probably had the most strike to him. Frank Gore would get there and be tough and consistent. Edgar and James, same thing. Willis McGahee was a physical freak. But you see the pop here that he has as safety. He had that pop at the running back position as well. Well, even though everybody remembers the speed, I think that aspect of his game, the toughness, was very underrated.
Jake Wynn says Washington had Taylor, Portis, Moss. Didn't Rocky McIntosh play on that team as well?
Yeah, they did.
And you know who else was on that team was Joe Salavea, Miami's defensive line coach, was one of the defensive tackles over there. So lots of connections, man.
Oh yeah, here you go. Look at the speed of Portis right here. Just he was tough, man. Look at finishing the run. This is why people have high standards for running back in Miami. When you see guys with these complete games, really just impressed with Portis. And you can see why Miami made the right decision of taking him a running back. God, if this guy was on, if Clint Portis, this is the summer. Let's have some fun with this. If Clinton Portis signed with the Florida Gators out of high school instead of the Miami Hurricanes, what happens to the Hurricane Gator rivalry? Because if you think about it, Miami and Florida were at the peak at that time. Florida was, I believe, the preseason number one the year that Miami in 2001, I want to say. Obviously, Miami beat the Gators in 2000 in the Sugar Bowl, and Miami beat the Gators again in 2002 at the Swamp. But those were very good Gator teams. Those were Gator teams that were a threat to Miami when you go back and look at it. If you take Clint Portis and put him on the Gator teams, Miami probably would have been fine because you would get McGahee, you'd get Gore, you'd be okay there, although they had injuries. But man, if Clint Portis on the Gators, they'd been a lot tougher to deal with. It's almost like Dalvin Cook. What if Dalvin Cook went to the Gators or the Canes instead of FSU? How would that have changed those rivalries?
And you know who the Gators running back was then? Was Rand Carthon, who's the GM for the Titans now.
Yeah, there it is.
Him and Ciatric Faison.
Yeah, so and Portis a million times better than those guys. So could that have changed the dynamic of the rivalry in the way Dalvin Cook did? Because Dalvin Cook was always a difference maker in those FSU, Miami, FSU, UF games during his tenure. He pretty much is the reason why FSU won all those games. Miami had better depth. Again, they would have signed Frank Gore 2 years later, they would have signed Willis McGahee. Assuming those guys are healthy, they probably would have broken out. But I think the Gators would have been a heck of a lot better with Clinton Portis in the backfield instead of what they had, and they were already pretty good.
All right, D, one more here before we wrap things up. Again, like this video, subscribe to the channel. We're doing something a little different today. If you're just joining us, we normally have our live show, our daily show, where we give you the news of the day and everything that's going on. So, like I said, doing something a little bit different today, but glad that we have almost 600 on here, and glad to see you guys enjoying it. We got a James Jackson shout out here from Anthony Burke, D.
Yeah, James Jackson. So, that's my era of the youth, was when you knew you had Edgar James, you knew you had something special with him, but when he would lead the game, James Jackson was even more dynamic with his speed, right? He'd come in and crank off 60-yard runs. Najee Davenport with his size and speed, not as laterally quick as some of these guys, but in terms of being a 240-plus back that was also a sprinter, everybody thought he was going to be the best one because of that size-speed combo. So that was really, those are two underrated backs. Both ended up having good Miami careers. Both ended up having pro careers and having success, having 100-yard games in the pros. Both dealt with injuries as well, both of those guys. I think James Jackson, even though he was very, very good in 2000 for the Canes and is one of our all-time leading rushers, I don't think he was ever as dynamic as he was early in his career. He got a little beat up. I think he hurt his ankle, gained some weight, was still a very good back. But in his early days, he was super dynamic and explosive. And, of course, Najee Davenport, his knee injury against Ohio State, cost him quite a bit. But those are good drops, man. James Jackson, we pull up the all-time leading rushers here list.
Marrero's showing his age today, man. He says, "Where's the DJ Dallas love? We love DJ. I don't think anyone hyped up DJ more during his Miami career than I did, but he doesn't belong in this debate. I'm sorry."
Yeah, I mean, look, this is, again, so by the all-time list, James Jackson 4th. And shout out to Greg Cooper, 6th in this list. Danielle Ferguson, Javaris James, Joe Yearby. I'm surprised to see him on the list. Some of these guys, they're not on the career rushing list because they were in and out, because they were so dominant. But I think with this, the whole point of this exercise is to show what the Miami standard at running back is. I mentioned this earlier. These are guys that are 210 plus, that are going 70 yards, that are making moves in the open field, that are returning kicks, that are catching the ball, that are pass blocking, that are smart, that are tough. This is what Miami needs at running back. This is the standard, right? When you see Otis Anderson, who didn't get discussed on this list, running for 10,000 yards in the pros in a Miami uniform, juking guys out full speed, booking it to the end zone at 225 plus pounds. That is what Miami Hurricanes expect at running back. Obviously, we've had that run before. We can have it again. Coach Cristobal, he is trying to bring it back. He knows what it looks like, but that is what a true franchise back looks like. And the last guy we'll name on this list, to me, is the definition of the physical freak Miami running back, and that is Willis McGahee from Miami Central, 5-star recruit out of high school who certainly lived up to it. I remember watching this guy the year he redshirted. So he redshirted his freshman year. And when he first got to campus, the guy redshirted, which is crazy for a running back. But I remember watching him in those practices. We had this guy named Jared McClure, who's this white safety from Penn State. I think he went on to be like an Abercrombie and Fitch model or something. But his football career, I think, ended quick when he went against Willis McGahee on Green Tree. It was actually Cobb Stadium. It's right next to Green Tree. And I remember vividly seeing Willis McGahee just run this guy over repeatedly and just completely dominate. And McGahee would get 8-yard runs that looked like they were 2-yard runs because he was so easy with it. He was so fast and he was so strong running through arm tackles. I mean, he just, again, it didn't look, he didn't have the open field quicks of some of these guys where he's turning guys around with quick moves and doing all these kind of things, but it would just be chunk after chunk after chunk. And then by the time he got to 2000, look at the stiff arm right here. By the time he got to that 2002 season, he would also have this 70-yard, 60-yard long runs.
And he has the all-time season touchdown record at Miami. Was it 29? He had that 6 touchdown game against Virginia Tech where neither of the defenses showed up that day in the Orange Bowl. But I mean, look, you look at the statistically what he did in his really, his couple years there at Miami, and he's a special one. Running away from people, the stiff arm, and look, the offensive lines that he played behind weren't littered with a ton of NFL guys. A lot of really, really good college guys there, but not a ton of guys that played a long time in the NFL. But he, once he got going downhill, he was very, very difficult to bring down at 230 plus with the speed that he had.
Oh, Kedrick Williams. I know he knows the McGahee family personally, so he has some good comments here. Pull him up here. So Willis was 5'11" and ran a 4.4 when we were in Springs Middle. McGahee was not a sleeper, right? So Clint Portis, I think, was a little underrated when we got him. Edgar James was known, but he had I think he had some grade issues. We signed him in the summer. He was kind of a weird recruitment. Frank Gore was also known, but was not the number one running back in the country who's going to go to Ole Miss. Willis McGahee was the one that was like a 5-star type back from the beginning. Everybody knew how good he was. Again, you see this was an unbelievable performance against Boston College. I remember he completely dusted these guys. But
and then to go 24th overall after that knee injury, still in an era that knee injuries weren't, catastrophic knee injuries like that weren't trusted, right? And then going out and having a really solid NFL career, he was busting off long runs late in his career, for the Ravens. I remember he had, I don't know if it was a playoff game or it was a late season game. He busted off like a 50, 60 yarder. And you're like, wow, what a specimen that he's still doing this at his age.
And with Tim Tebow, right? He was a Pro Bowl player that year with Tim Tebow, helped him, with the running threat of Tebow, he was just eating, and he was the best player on that offense, probably him and Demaryius Thomas. Willis McGahee was. You see the speed, man. This guy was just such a truck, but not as quick as some of these other guys. That's one thing I'll say. He didn't have the open field jukes of the guys we've seen on this list, but he didn't really need to because he was so strong and fast. Probably one of the fastest guys on this list, 4.2 in his prime. So, with his strength and speed, he didn't really need to. I remember against Penn State, there was a blitz, and Cam Wake, I think his name was Derek. He had a different name at the time. It was going by a different first name, and he came in on a blitz as an outside linebacker. This is up in Happy Valley. Tried to jump over Willis McGahee. Willis McGahee, chop blocked him. The guy did a flip, tore his ACL, kind of hurt his Penn State career for a while. Didn't get going until he went to the CFL, went to the pros, Cam Wake. So that just shows you the force and power of McGahee, man. He really, he hurt people here.
D, check out, I think it's this play right here, Kevin Beard. This is some teach tape right here. You could show his young receivers. Look at Kevin Beard flying out of nowhere here, coming for the block there, and getting himself in the mix. So KB, you should use that one in film if you don't already.
Oh, I love that, Pete. Yeah, this of course, this was an iconic game. I was here. These FSU games were so hot back in the day.
Oh my, this was the wide left game. Xavier Beitia.
Yeah, exactly. This was a game Miami really walked through the game. Greg Jones was really out physically the Canes, but ultimately Willis McGahee on a screen pass changed the game and allowed Miami to take the win just because of his special ability, his size and speed. He'd been kind of kept in check for most of the game, and then he really just exploded with that screen pass.
And D, very much like Edge, he had that aura about him with that visor. And just, looking rocked up at that position. And again, number 2, something about the single digits at that position. He checked all the boxes for me. I think I'm going him as my number 1 guy. But again, the criteria I know is different for everyone.
There you go. So look, we got a lot of discussion. The people are saying Frank Gore. I'm saying Edgar and James. Pete's saying Willis McGahee. Again, this is all no injuries in prime. But I think the big takeaway as we go through this list is that there is no other school in the country that has produced elite backs consistently over time like the University of Miami. I ain't talking about physical freaks, guys that defined the prototype at the position, whether you're going back to the 70s and 60s, Chuck Foreman, what he did. We talk about Otis Anderson in the 80s. We talk about Edgar and James in the 90s, defining the aesthetic, making all these big plays. And then in the 2000s, the best tailbacks of the 2000s with guys like Clinton Portis, Willis McGahee, and of course, Frank Gore. The standard of the running back position and the way it's supposed to look like physically, athletically, intellectually, toughness-wise, blocking, receiving, making plays, winning championships is the University of Miami still. And that's what we're trying to get back to.
Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel. We'll be back tomorrow with our daily show. And it doesn't stop here. CanesInsight.com. Go and sign up completely free. Check out the forums. You can get into discussions like this with other Canes fans every day. And again, excited to keep bringing you guys all this content. Appreciate all the support as always. Go Canes.
Go Canes.